Hi guys and welcome to Fandom Newbie. My name is Shruti and today I'm going to be talking about some underrated books that you guys have probably not heard of before, but which I think are really good and which should be read. Now the first book that I want to talk about is Jwalakumar and the Gift of Fire by Hansta Sovendra Shekhar. Now this book is actually a children's novel and it is only around 120 pages or so. It's a really short book, but it is so heartwarming and it is so sweet. So what this book is about is it basically revolves around a family that lives in a village in Madhya Pradesh, and this village really doesn't get a lot of help from the government or from NGOs, and they really have to struggle day to day to even make food, to even keep themselves warm in the winter. They have a life that is filled with struggles. Now one day a family in this village discovers a dragon, and this dragon and the gift of fire that this dragon provides the family helps them with everything that they need help with. And it's basically just a really heartwarming tale of the connection that this family forms with this dragon and how this dragon helps the family. Now on a superficial level, that's what the story is about, and it's written in a very simple, very light-hearted, very endearing way. But I feel like the underlying message that Hansta Sovendra Shekhar wants to give us is he wants to highlight how difficult it is for these people to live in rural India. And he also wants to bring to light how the government and how NGOs kind of fail these people to the point where they have to kind of depend on mythological creatures to provide them the things that they need to survive, which ideally should have been provided by the government or by institutions that are out there to help these people. So while on the surface it's like a children's tale that is just really heartwarming and endearing and very easy to read, I feel like if you just scratch the surface a little bit, that this is the message that the author wants to give us, and I found that very powerful. So yeah, if you want to read a very endearing tale that really brings to light some of the struggles that people living in rural India have to face, then I highly recommend Jwalakumar and the Gift of Fire. The next book that I want to talk about is The Mercies by Kiran Millwood Hargrave. Basically what this book is about is that it follows the lives of these women who live in a fishing village in Norway in the 1600s. Now in the 1600s, obviously women don't have a lot of rights, they don't really work, and it's the men in the family that provide for the women. And the fishing village, since it is on the sea, the entire revenue and economy of that village runs on the men going out into the sea fishing, catching the fish, and then selling the fish to the surrounding counties. Now what happens one day is that a huge storm completely ravages all the boats that have gone out for to fish for the village, and in that storm almost all the men in the village are killed. So now basically the women in this village are left to fend for themselves, and they just have to rise above the occasion and they have to go out there and survive and make a living for themselves. But in doing so, in just kind of coming together, fighting for themselves, being independent, and just trying to survive, these qualities, along with certain other cultural aspects that are happening in the 1600s, make people, and by people I mean other powerful men in surrounding counties, believe that the people in that village are actually witches. And then basically a witch hunt happens within the village. And it was just one of the most heart-wrenching, just extremely emotional and powerful stories that I have read about. And what made it even more emotional and more powerful was when I figured out that that actual story, the story that this entire book is based on, is actually real, which means that everything that happened in this book is real. The storm, the women, the witch hunts, the way that these women were tortured, all of that is real, and it is just so heartbreaking and so emotional to read. The only thing that I have against this book a little bit is the language. The language is a little bit difficult. The writing style is a little bit difficult to get into, but I feel that listening to the audiobook really helped me in that sense. So yeah, if you can, listen to the audiobook and read this book because it is just it was very, very heart-wrenching and amazing. The next book that I want to talk about is Dhopari by Pankaj Kapoor. Now, this is originally a Hindi book that has been translated into English, and I actually read the translated version. So I read the version in English because my Hindi is not really good, but I have heard that the Hindi version is beautifully written. So if you can read Hindi, then I recommend reading the Hindi version. But if you can't, the English translation was also really, really good. This book follows our main character, Amma B, who is a 60-year-old woman who lives alone in a Haveli in Lucknow. Now, Amma B is a widower and her only son lives with his family in the US. So essentially, she's just all alone living in this really big Haveli. She also gets bothered every day at 3 p.m. by the sound of unknown footsteps that comes in her veranda and on her roof, and that really, really scares her. All of this changes the day that Ammavi decides to have a lodger, and the day that this young woman, Sabiha, enters her life and enters her home. What follows next is the story of the unlikely bond that forms between Sabiha and Ammavi, and just how both of them kind of affect each other's lives and how they change their lives. What I loved about this story is how each character is just very quirky in their own way, and how each character contributes to the story in a very funny and hilarious way. Even the house help who is there in Ammabi's house, Jumman, he is just such a funny character and he brings so much humor to the story. And also Ammabi's character, who is actually sometimes very unlikable, but she's just so quirky in her own way that like it's just very interesting to want to read about her. So yeah, this story is really about the relationships between these characters and their life, and it's very, very simply written, but it's so beautiful because it's very nuanced and filled with all the depth of emotions that these characters face, and it was just a treat to read. The next book that I want to talk about is The Gurkha and the Lord of Tuesdays by Saad Hossain. Now, this book was such a fun ride. So what this book is about is that it's basically about a jinn that has fallen asleep for thousands and thousands of years. Now this jinn is woken up one day and he finds himself in an extremely modern, extremely like sci-fi kind of world, and it's very different from the world that he is left behind. Now this jinn is the Lord of Tuesdays, so he is like this all-powerful jinn whose life purpose it is to rule over humans and just kind of rule them with an iron fist. So that's what he sets out to do. He meets a Gurkha along the way, and the Gurkha and this jinn basically set out to Kathmandu, but the Kathmandu that they go to is not the Kathmandu of today. It is actually a futuristic Kathmandu that is ruled by an artificial intelligence system called Karma. So what follows is basically a hilarious tale of this Gurkha and the jinn trying to kind of overthrow Karma and rule Kathmandu, but along the way they also discover everything that's wrong with the system, like this artificial intelligence system Karma, and why it might actually be best to overthrow that system or change the system because it's not as good as it seems. What I loved about the story is first the world building. The world building was amazing. Like this futuristic Kathmandu that is ruled by an AI system was just mind-blowing, and it was so well developed. And also just the juxtaposition of this ancient being that is the jinn and like the kind of rules that he lives by versus this like extremely futuristic society and the rules that they live by, and just like how like these two worlds collide and how they were just so different. Like that juxtaposition was just so interesting to see and read about. So definitely check out The Gurkha and the Lord of Tuesdays. The next book that I want to talk about is Bhaunri, a novel by Anukriti Upadhyay. This story follows our main character Bhaunri, who has grown up in a village in Rajasthan, and she has a fiercely protective, extremely feminist mother who has brought up Bhaunri with the same values and the same ideals of being independent and being very feminist. Bhaunri then marries into a very traditional Rajasthani family that is slightly like richer as compared to hers, and this family is very traditional and very, very chauvinist. Now, what the story follows is basically how Bhaunri adjusts to this new kind of chauvinistic family, and also how she adjusts to her husband, who she is absolutely infatuated by, and she's just madly in love with him, but who doesn't really treat Bindri with the respect that she deserves. Now, this story is a very, very simple story, and it's very, very simply written. But again, like, the underlying things that the author wants to bring about in this story is just the story of love, the story of jealousy, the story of feminism, and like what a woman's place is in like a traditional home in, again, rural Rajasthan. It's just like brought out in a very, very subtle way. Like all these things about love, about jealousy, about lust, like all these issues are brought about in such a subtle way, and it's it was just so interesting to read about. Like, you know, page by page, the story is just about the life of this family and how they lead their lives, and like probably the trials and tribulations that Bindri faces in this household. But I don't know, like the nuance in this story was so good, and it really talks about like what one woman would do for love, what one woman would do for her independence in a household. And it was just very, very interesting to read about. Like, I can't really explain it because the story is very simple, but it just has a whole lot of, I feel like, lessons and a whole lot of nuance packed into it that it made it very, very interesting to read. The next book that I want to talk about is Pride and Premeditation by Tirza Price. Now, this book is basically a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, but with a murder mystery twist. I read this in a reading vlog that I did a few weeks ago. If you haven't checked that out, I'll leave the link up here. But this book was just so much fun. It basically follows like a similar story of Pride and Prejudice, meaning the characters are the same, the relationships between the characters are the same, and like a lot of the Pride and Prejudice plot points are also the same, but they've been woven into a murder mystery in which Bingley is actually the suspect for a murder that has taken place. Basically, in this book, Elizabeth Bennet is a lot more independent, and she actually wants to work at her father's law firm. So she's basically training to be a lawyer, and because of that, you just see a more feisty, a more sassy Elizabeth Bennet, and you see her trying to solve this mystery in which Bingley is the main suspect, and she wants to basically prove Bingley's innocence. And it was just a totally fun ride. Again, especially if you're a fan of Pride and Prejudice, then definitely check out this book. The next book that I want to talk about is Uglies by Scott Westerfeld. This is a young adult dystopian science fiction series that is set in a world where at the age of 16, everyone gets like a plastic surgery that makes them look absolutely perfect. So up until the age of 16, everyone is considered ugly, but at 16, you get a plastic surgery that makes everything about your appearance absolutely perfect, and then you become a pretty. So the story follows our main character Tally, who is about to turn 16, and she cannot wait to become a pretty. She cannot wait to enter the glamorous, magical, wondrous world of all pretties, and she's really, really excited to do so. Until she meets another girl, Shay, who is kind of a rebel and who kind of changes Tally's mind about this ideal world that she wants to enter into. I feel like the commentary that Scott Westerfeld has given on just like the unrealistic beauty standards which are there in society, and what it means to have an ideal society and like to have equality, and how, again, like, you know, differences between people should be there to have like a good balanced society. Like all of these things which have been brought up in many dystopian books, but the way he's brought it out using beauty standards as an example, I feel was just very, very powerful. And if you liked books like The Hunger Games and those kind of dystopian books, then I feel like you will really enjoy this series as well. And yeah, I highly recommend it. The next book that I want to talk about is An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. Now, I've spoken about this book a few times on my channel because this has become one of my all-time favorite books. I absolutely adore this book, and I can't believe that not a lot of people have been talking about it. Firstly, Hank Green is John Green's brother, and I feel like everyone knows John Green, but not that many people know Hank Green, and it just makes me really sad because even though I also just discovered this book, now I feel like everyone should read this book because it is so good, and Hank is such an amazing author. So what this book is about, it basically follows our main character April, as like one day she kind of discovers this statue that has randomly appeared on a sidewalk in New York, and she really loves this statue and she thinks it's very intriguing. So she and a friend film a YouTube video about this statue. What April doesn't know is that this statue just hasn't appeared in New York City, but it's appeared in almost every major city all over the world. And because she and her friend were one of the first ones to put up a YouTube video about it, her video goes viral, and April has she suddenly becomes this internet sensation and she becomes super famous. Apart from that, the statues also have some weird things going on about them, where there's some science fiction-y stuff that is happening with the statues, and April, along with the entire world, is trying to figure out what is this mystery behind the statues. Now, while this entire premise might seem a little bit strange, what this book really delves into is just modern day issues, like what it means to be a social media influencer, how fame on social media can affect your personal life, your relationships, your mental health, through this extremely science fiction-y world which is there in this book. I feel like it tackles a lot of modern day human emotions and issues, and it's just done in such an engaging and fun way. And Hank Green's writing is again super witty, super sarcastic, funny, and very relatable. So if you want to read a really fun, fast-paced book which tackles a whole bunch of issues that I feel like youngsters face today, then I highly recommend An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. The next book that I want to talk about is A Murder on Malabar Hill by Sujata Massey. Now, this book takes place in 1920s in Bombay, and it basically follows a murder mystery that has taken place on Malabar Hill. The main character in this book is Parveen Mistry, who is the first female solicitor in Bombay, and she's basically training to also be a lawyer, but because of the rules of the High Court or whatever, women are not allowed to be lawyers in Bombay yet. Her father's law firm stumbles upon this case where a murder has taken place in a bungalow on Malabar Hill. But the issue with this murder is that the three main witnesses, or the three people who were in the bungalow when the murder took place, are actually three widows who are living in parda, meaning they are Muslim women who are not allowed to speak to men outside of their family, and they're not allowed to venture out of the house alone. So because of that, it becomes a little bit difficult for the police to investigate, since they can't actually access these witnesses. And Parveen becomes the main person who acts kind of like a link between these women and the police. And that's how she kind of gets involved in the investigation, and how she gets absorbed into the lives of these women, and how she kind of tries to solve the case, because she becomes so close to these women who have now become engulfed in this sort of murder mystery that has taken place. The murder mystery itself is very interesting because of the aspect of these women in parda. But apart from that, what is really interesting about this book is just how it gives a glimpse into 1920s Bombay society, and how it talks about how it was living with the British in your own backyard, and how people navigated the British rule and still kind of got their way, and also how it was to be a woman in the 1920s living in Bombay, trying to fight for basic rights and things like that. And it is just such a beautiful story that talks about this woman's journey in trying to be the first woman solicitor in Bombay, as well as this murder mystery that also really shines a light on how 1920s Bombay society was. And the last book that I want to talk about is The Perfect World of Mivako Sumida by Clarissa Genovan. Now, this book follows our main character Ryose as he's trying to uncover the reason why this girl, Mivako Sumida, who he was in love with, why she committed suicide. So basically, Mivako Sumida one day just kind of disappears and she hangs herself, and it leaves all of the people who care about her and who love her just completely shocked. So this boy who was in love with her, Ryuse, along with Mivako's best friend, set out on a journey to kind of discover what it was that caused Mivako to commit suicide. It's kind of like a story of these extremely complex characters, and it's a story of mental health, and it's a story that tells you that even though on the surface you might feel like a person is perfect and a person is really happy and a person is showing a really brave front. You really don't know what's going on, like, in the background. You don't know what this person's story actually is, and it gives that message in such an amazing way, and through the portrayal of these extremely complex, extremely well written, well developed characters. And it's written in such an amazing, engaging way that you can't help but feel for these characters and just dive into their world and try to figure them out, because each of them is so complex and different in so many ways. And it was just a very, very heartwarming, very engaging read. And if you really want to read about like extremely intricate and complex characters, then again, I highly recommend The Perfect World of Mivako Sumida, because it was a very, very engaging, amazing read. So yeah, those were my recommendations for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys found some new and different reads that you had never heard of before. Probably. If you did, give this video a big fat thumbs up. Leave a comment down below letting me know some of your most underrated like book recommendations. Which recommendations do you think that people should read that you think that not a lot of people know about? Let me know down in the comments. And of course, do subscribe to my channel for more book related videos. I'll see you guys next time.